Hello everybody and welcome to the All About Film for Adox Color Mission 200 35mm C41 color film. This video discusses Adox Color Mission 200, as we're going to call it through most of this video, CM200. This video is going to look at how to use this film, the characteristics, no technical details, but many sample images. CM200 is a medium film available in factory-spooled 35mm cassettes of 36 exposures. As a note, my understanding of the Color Mission origin is that it came from another manufacturer, and that Adox purchased that stock of film to fund their own color film research, hence the name Color Mission. I shot CM200 at 200 ISO and 100 ISO, the latter quite a bit in my Kyocera T-Proof. To my eye, the color quality was better at 200, which is to say, a bit deeper. At 100 ISO, the shadow detail was a bit better, though the colors often seemed lacking. Either setting will work just fine. I did push CM200 to 400 ISO without development compensation for a few test shots, and the results were, I think this word is both kind and fair, worthless. So here's my top tip. Don't push CM200 without compensation for your development time, and honestly, probably don't push it at all. I've heard that many labs and users recommend using CM200 at 100 ISO, and I think that, as I noted, is probably fine advice. I'm more nuanced, however. For portraits, overexposure is good. For color-rich landscapes, seascapes, and so forth, box speed may be more appropriate because the colors pop a bit more, though at the expense of shadows. Alright, so this tip is going to sound silly, but hear me out. The stickers on the cassette tubs peel off very easily, and that allows them to be placed on a camera body and then removed from it without leaving adhesive. Adox. All of your labeling should be like this. And not just Adox, all filmmakers should have labels like this. The labels on the cassette containers, which are the black tubs with the orange caps, were an absolute delight. Silly thing to fangirl over, yes, but these little usability things are important touches. This next tip comes from Frank Wooters, who notes that with portraits, and I share this sentiment, skin tones can skew reddish. That point is especially true of the way that CM200 can make us pale folk look like we fell asleep at the beach wearing only a banana hammock. Be sure when you edit this stock in post to control your magenta and red levels if you photograph Caucasians. On the subjects of grain and color, CM200 has a look. The colors look a lot like those of vintage films, say from the late 70s and early 80s, with a grain that invites itself in for coffee, says hello, and is generally a welcome guest. So just expect that the images from CM200 will scream film, and you'll be happy. On color saturation, CM200 can work in a camera with a plastic lens and do so well, as the color saturation in those tends to skew rich, and the softness in those lenses is less apparent because of the CM200 grain. The last tip I have is that, though, yes, I just said this film will work well in a plastic lensed camera, I'd recommend avoiding it there. Use this in good cameras with good lenses, and that will allow it to hold its own within its weight class. Grain is noticeable but polite. You will see it, but it won't ruin your image. The grain in Color Mission 200 creates a look that conveys that these are film images. You must buy into that aesthetic, or you will simply fight against this stock and hate using it. Tonality and tonal range are exposure ISO dependent, and in any situation, they are far from class leading. Shadows get clipped like hair in a maniac's barbershop, drastically and without regard for what's there. Highlights tend to be preserved a bit better. This is highly true when exposed at box speed and developed normally. Exposed at 100 ISO and developed normally, this film performs in a slightly more typical manner with some shadow and highlight loss. So use that knowledge and sample photos in this video to inform how you shoot this stock. Acutance is soft to my eye. If you look at the images in this video that have leaves on trees, you'll see that those are generally a bit blurry and that the leaves tend to blend into the scene behind them. For use, this does mean that CM200 will provide more flattering results for subjects like people and less flattering results for subjects like landscapes. The softer acutance also contributes to the stock's vintage look. Again, this is a characteristic of the film that creates the aesthetic, and your choice is to embrace it or hate the experience. Contrast is high by contemporary C41 film standards, with dark shadows and bright highlights and midtones doing a lot of the work when they're recorded. This contrast also translates into saturated colors because the same film characteristic that creates dark shadows translates into color saturation. Sharpness is not exceptional, but the film can reproduce some fine details. Scenes are resolved in suitable detail to recognize them, but you won't get sharpness that shows every eyelash, stray hair, or flower stamen. This backs up the statement I made in the acutance note that this film works well for human subjects. Softer films hide blemishes on people and can work very well for portraits. Dynamic range, also called gamma, is hard to identify by eye, but looking at the contrast in the images in this video, I would assume this film has a fairly steep curve. Digital conversion is fine if you use the entire frame. As you crop images, the softness and grain become overbearing. If you use the entire frame, those characteristics, the softness and the grain, can add a pleasing texture to your scenes. One last note here. Adox does not provide any technical information for this film, neither online nor when I ask them directly. So we're gonna skip all the technical sections and go straight to the review. Adox indicates that Color Mission will be around a while and that their supply of this stock can last a handful of years. To that end, I hope that Color Mission achieves its mission, bridging the gap until Adox can fire up their machines to produce their own color films. I like Color Mission, but it doesn't feel like an Adox film in the way that their CMS and CHS stocks do. And by that, I mean it feels emotive and not technical. Adox black and white films are stunning examples of film engineering with exceptional capabilities. Color Mission is a well-made film, but it does not wow me from a technical perspective. I like the color palette, have grown to appreciate the contrast, and can even enjoy the grain in many of the images that I took with it. It just has a different soul than do Adox's own films. Color Mission 200 is a bit of a misfit in the Adox lineup for that reason, and my hope is that misfit status stems from it being someone else's stock that was purchased by Adox for use under their brand. That, at least, is my understanding of the Color Mission origin. Misfits sometimes belong, but this one does feel out of place. That said, it does one thing that Adox films do well: create interesting and captivating images. Color Mission, on that front at least, accomplishes the most important thing that a film can do: create a captivating image. Color Mission is far from flawless, as evidenced by the images in this video. And sample images online will show that shadow areas, especially ones without detail, will contain substantial digital noise. Color Mission struggles to record shadows, as noted already. Honestly, Color Mission would feel more at home under the lomography badge, which should not at all be taken as an insult, by the way. I applaud what Adox is doing with Color Mission and how they're using the stock to build out their offerings. My sincere hope for their first Adox originated color emulsion is that they will have something with a slightly flatter gamma line, a bit less grain, and a color palette distinct and unique to their own production. Misfits may belong, and I guess in some ways maybe Color Mission does, but it is ultimately a stock with a ticking clock. Insofar as I know, no more of the stock will be produced, and when what they have runs out, it will exist only in the history books. So get some Color Mission in the near future, and while you can. Leave some of it for other people, too, but enjoy Color Mission while you can for what it is and what it does.